Richard, and my new friend John. How you doing?
Not too bad.
Nice to meet you, chaps. I'm absolutely boiling in here. It's a bit warm today, man. Do you know what I mean? So, in a bit of a departure, I suppose, from the people we've had in so far, this is going to be a kind of trip through the ages.
Yeah.
Am I right? Well, that's the basis for it. So, you tell me that the main focus of interest and how you guys met was the Calderstones, which they're the Neolithic stones that stand in Calderstones Park, right?
That's right, yeah.
So is there any idea about where they originally stood and what the purpose of where they were was?
Yeah. The really interesting thing about the Calderstones is that it's believed that where they stood is probably not far from where they are now. It was on the edge of Calderstones Park at the junction of where Druids Cross Road comes down and meets sort of Menlove Avenue, crossroads at the entrance to Scholars Park. What I find fascinating about it is that the earliest actual recorded mention of the Calderstones is in the 1500s, and it mentions that they mark a boundary between Chilwell, Allerton and Wavertree.
Right.
And even if you look at a modern map today, the boundary between Chilwell, Allerton and Wavertree is still at that location. So I think that they have been used as a boundary marker for centuries, if not, thousands of years. That they've always had a massive importance to how we understand the area.
So what is the Neolithic age in sort of timescale terms? What's that, about 2,500 BC or something?
Yeah, about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
3,000 BC-ish. 2,800.
So the earliest written records,
from the 1500s, which is mad.
It's not even in the Domesday Book.
Nope.
No, because they're not important. That's the mad thing about when you see all these standing stones all around Britain. People just took them for granted. They were just there. They were just part of literally the landscape. And it's only because the Calderstones were in this boundary dispute they became this kind of where the stones are. Well, that's where my land starts.
So it's a legal document.
Yeah. So it apart from that, they were scratching posts and people
quarried them out.
People quarried them out and all the rest of it. Nobody had any kind of respect for them, but not just that. They didn't really have any idea why they were there. They were things from just the past.
Well, that's the truth in it about antiquity. I mean, especially one of the things I find really interesting about London is the amount of antiquity that's there, but the amount of stuff that's just been chucked away. I mean, when you consider that the last remnants of the Roman bridge were only dynamited in the late 19th century.
Yeah.
But there's a more interesting story, I always think, because one of the walks I've done quite a lot in London, I've talked to you about this before, is from Bayswater to Oxford, Oxford Road, Oxford Street. Oxford Road's in Manchester, Michael. But down to Soho from Bayswater, so you got Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens and all that. But you pass Marble Arch, obviously. Now it's got its own interesting history, recorded history, because that's where Tyburn Cross was. Where they used to hang all the heretics and stuff like that during the Reformation. But there's one really interesting thing. There was a thing there called, it depends what you look at, it ended up being called Ossulstone, and there's still a region, a little part of London called Ossulstone. So this stone was actually, a Neolithic standing stone that was there forever and ever and ever. And when they built Marble Arch, it was originally meant to be the gatehouse. It was meant to be the gate for Buckingham Palace, but Queen Victoria didn't like it, so they were like, what we're going to do with this? All right, we'll dump it down there. And where Marble Arch now stands is where Oswald Stone, or Ossulstone, whatever you want to call it, used to stand. So what they did when they put Marble Arch there is they buried it. And then this is on historical record. And then what they did was they dug it up a bit and then leaned it against the side of Marble Arch, and it went missing. So the sort of disregard.
Have you seen this stone?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, I doubt it's been smashed up or anything. I would imagine it's in some private collection somewhere. I don't know. But you were saying about the markings on your arm. You were talking about the
yeah.
So that's from the Calderstone. Well, similar markings are on this Ossulstone because it's a drawing, and that's all you've got left. But I find it fascinating that it's only 19th century's now, just 120 years ago, that people weren't bothered about this stuff then.
It's just had and if you asked people about it, even the people in the you look in the records of kind of the antiquarian societies and everything, and the way they talk about it, they're the first people to ever have cared about it, and that they love that, but they also just come up with these mad half the time they wanted to just go like, it's because the Druids used this stone to drain the blood, and these are the channels which the blood ran through. You know, they just love to make up these stories about this stuff. But it's not until people get interested in basically, you know, bullshitting and spinning a yarn about it that the stuff is even noticed. Like I say, otherwise it's what your cows rub up against or whatever. Well,
yeah, I mean, the religion that we know as, am I right in saying it's the Druidic religion? Is that right, or is it Druidry? I don't know what they call it.
Yeah.
It only goes back to like the 19th century itself.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tied in with all the kind of the Wiccan stuff as well, which is all, you know, pretty modern stuff. Obviously, it's people interested in these ancient ideas, but it's all kind of you know, reenactment and reimagining sort of thing. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think, you know, as long as people understand, you know, that's where it's coming from, and you know that it leads to these remnants of things being preserved. You know, so much of people who are archaeologists, and we've had this conversation loads of times. You know, it's 90% storytelling. It's, you know, they find that fragment of pot, and then you see on Time Team, and they go, and it would have looked like this, and it's like 9 foot tall, and you know, it's got all these amazing pictures on it, and it's like they found that much of it. You know, there's a lot of conjecture and storytelling involved, even in the most professional.
Well, having lived in a village that was probably about 30 miles from Stonehenge or something, just moved back up here, and there was these two guys that used to work on the house, fantastic blokes, and Roy and his son Roy. So it'd be like that, all right Roy, and all that. Anyway, he told me that in the 20s, I think it was, his granddad used to tell him about, you know, with Stonehenge and that, and they were just putting the stones anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, again, people think that Stonehenge in its current formation is how it was.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm sure that I heard farmers dynamiting stones to get them out of the way in fields and stuff like that, you know. But yeah, he just said, oh, my granddad was up there, he was putting them anywhere. You know, he was on wages. You know, and all this. So
would have been the Ministry of Works then, probably.
Something, I'm sure, like that. I mean, he didn't go into too much detail, but it's a strange thing, isn't it? Because I remember when they were doing Sefton Park up here, they wanted it to look exactly like it was in Victorian times. And that's just impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, everything like this is so subjective. I'm really interested in them moving the Calderstones. I thought it was moved once. I mean, what was this for? Just aesthetics, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to come back to moving monuments, there's a fantastic, look him up if you ever get the chance, a fellow called Osbert Lancaster, who was around in the 1940s, 1950s, and he hated the idea that the governments, the Ministry of Works, were tidying up these ruins, and he called it the Ministry for Tidy Monuments.
When you say tidying up, what do you mean?
Well, rebuilding them. Essentially,
just rebuilding them.
Doing what you said of the Stonehenge, you know.
All right, I get the putting them back on top of the things, because they've got the little. You can see that. All right, that's fallen, and I get that.
Yeah.
But like you say, tidying them up.
Tidying up, yeah. They did it loads, especially with not just prehistoric stuff like ruined abbeys, you know, the ones that were all destroyed in the Reformation. Tintern Abbey, I think, was one of the famous ones.
Right.
Covered in ivy, bits were falling off, and they literally rebuilt it into, so it looked more like a church and less like a ruin, to give people that idea. And he disliked that at all. He thought it should be a really romantic sort of ruin. But we've got this history in Britain of, because we've got so much heritage, we're actually quite loose with it sometimes. I mean, the Calderstones come back to saying where they moved in, I think it was 1845. The rich man, Joseph Needs Walker, who lived in Calderstone's mansion house, he didn't like this jumble of messy stones, which was the remains of this burial chamber, the Calderstones, lying at the entrance to his estate. So he basically must have just got a team of fellas, dug them up and rearranged them into a stone circle.
Right, so they weren't even in a circle.
No, they were just...
No, it's a burial mound like the ones you get in Wales and like Newgrange in
Ireland.
In Ireland, so you know it would have been this. The stones would have been used as like lintels, and you know it's part of the structure. Okay. But that wasn't what antiquarians thought the stones were for in them days. So he went, make a circle of them.
Ancient stones come in circles.
And then
right.
That's when interest starts coming. Like 10 years later, you start getting all these people who are the antiquaries writing and saying there is an amazing stone circle in Liverpool.
Right.
We must go and visit it because it's so well preserved. It's, and he's only got his gardeners to do it kind of not so long ago. But then everybody actually gives a shit finally. So,
Well, it's a funny thing, Liverpool, because you see, the perception is that Liverpool just springs up during the Industrial Revolution, and there's no precedent to it whatsoever. I mean, even the castle that they had here has been destroyed, hasn't it? I don't know when that was. That's probably Victorian time.
1730s, actually.
Oh, 1730s.
Georgian times, yeah.
Because I know, didn't Lord Lever build a replica?
Replica at Rivington Pike?
Yeah, I've been once. Have you ever been?
Never been.
Yeah.
Never made it there.
But it's a replica of the ruin, isn't it, rather than the... Yeah. So why did he get... If it was destroyed in 1730, presumably that was built in 18 something or other. So he just did it from sketches, I presume.
Yeah,
and stuff like that.
I imagine so, yeah.
Because there's that drawing, painting, isn't there, from 1680 or something, isn't it?
There's a few drawings I've seen of Liverpool Castle, but the problem is every single drawing I've seen of it, every one looks different from the other.
Yeah.
So I think you've got this problem where you've probably had a castle at one time that looked one way, and then over the years, the bits have fallen off. Somebody's built another bit onto it, or that wall was in the wrong place to unlock that, because it wasn't being used as a defendable castle for 150, 200 years before it got destroyed.
So when was it built? Was it a Norman one, or is it?
Yeah, I think it was Norman content. I think it was Roger de Poitiers probably built it in.
Right. Because I know Edward built all the ones along the Welsh coastline. Is that right?
I mean, it was only a small castle. It wasn't very big.
Right.
Liverpool wasn't important enough to have a major sort of castle, but it was to defend the harbour, defend the port, and used by King John to launch an invasion of Ireland.
Right, so it had that purpose. Yeah.
That's the only purpose of Liverpool.
Of Liverpool, really.
Yeah.
Was to invade Ireland and failed at it.
Yeah.
A string of villages. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And we're living proof of that.
Well, the really interesting thing here, Mike, is that the markings on the cobblestones, these spirals, these lines and these shapes, you don't get them in the rest of England particularly.
Okay.
Where you find them is Wales, Scotland and Ireland.
Right.
So we're talking that, although we joke now about the 19th century Liverpool having a massive Irish population and stuff like that, there have been links across the Irish Sea to a culture going way back into the Neolithic period. This is the New Stone Age. So we're more a Celtic people here than anywhere else in England, really.
Obviously, it's not a very well looked after monument, so it's fell by the wayside a bit, and people don't mention it as much as they should. But it's that link that's the thing that always gets me, that nobody ever picks up on. Is, you say, there's this kind of straight line of these monuments that goes right across, and stops with the one in Liverpool kind of thing. And there's a story to be told there. What it is, I have no idea, but there's something going on, isn't there? But nobody ever seems to dig into that very much.
I think it's because, I think it's a combination personally of successive invasion obliterating, particularly the Romans that came here, and their intent was to obliterate the culture that went before them, in the same way that the Taliban or whatever blew up those big Buddha things. They want, it's a scorched earth policy, and I suppose the way that you subjugate and conquer people is to remove their culture.
Yeah.
And from what I've read, and I'm trying to think who wrote it now, but there was a guy who wrote an account of Caesar coming here. I can't think of his bloody name, it'll come to me anyway. And in that he described, they name all the tribes, don't they? Because I think I'm right in saying that in the stratas and geology, they're kind of all named after British tribes. You see this sort of thing. I think it's only in sort of, in honorarium things, like they'll name a star after some. I think it's a convenient term of reference. And so the way that I believe they did it was, apart from destroying any literature to do with any pre-existing culture, and to try and smash up any... I mean, they did their best to destroy everything that went in the path, put villas up, and then post-Roman noblemen, or whatever they called them over here, to marry into tribes, didn't they?
Yeah.
Romanise them.
Yeah, Romane, British, whatever. Yeah, so, I don't know, in terms of Celtic origin of stuff, I'm not that well up on things, but it makes perfect sense.
It's one of the things that I think's... a lot of people know the word Celtic, and the thing is, when you look at Celts as a sort of people or a race, whatever you want to call them, they stretched all the way from Ireland right the way through to Bulgaria and places like that. They were no way were they one people with one monoculture. It's just far too big a space for that, and it was literally, we call them Celts because that's what the Romans called them.
Exactly.
The winners write history. They probably didn't see themselves as anything other than, well, we're the ones who live in this place, we're the ones who live in that place.
Yeah.
I doubt the Celts from Bavaria thought they were the same as the Celts from Ireland.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, we call the Welsh because of the Romans, don't we?
Yeah.
Isn't it? Wasn't there a word Wallis or something for
Foreigner. Yeah.
Foreigner, yeah. And it's from that Latin root that we get Welch on a bet and all these other things. It's an insult, isn't it?
Where you get the Wirral from as well.
Oh, is that where that's from?
Wirral means land of the foreigners.
Still does.
Yeah.
So this monument at Calderstone, has it got anything, at least in Cheshire or something, that corresponds to it? It's just Wales.
No, nearest one's Grynkechley D.
Yeah.
Am I saying that right?
Yeah, I was going to leave that for you to say, yeah.
No, Bacladia di Garis.
Ah, there you go.
Wow, that's
What's that?
impressive.
Bit of Welsh,
I've forgotten which is which. The Giantess's Apron Full is one of them.
Yeah.
And what's the other one? The Old Dark Grove?
Grove, I think, yeah. The Old Dark Grove and the Giantess's Apron Full are the names translated into English.
Right.
But these are two monuments very similar to how the Calderstones would have been back in the day. So they're passage graves. So what they are is basically a stone chamber with a stone passage onto it, like an igloo basically, covered in a huge earth mound. And much like the one at Newgrange, which is the famous one, apparently were aligned so that on the solstice day, when the sun rose, it shone straight down the passage. So for most of the year, this chamber in the centre was pitch black, darkness. And then for one or maybe a couple of days a year, as the sun was in the right place, the light would shine through and illuminate that central chamber. And the thing that's amazing about this is that the stones covered in these carvings, those carvings must have been done before they were buried.
Right.
And yet they were only visible for one day a year.
Yeah, they're only to be seen from the inside. You know, there's no decoration outside, and they're to be seen at that specific time.
And they're on both sides of the stone, so even on the buried side,
yeah,
they're carved where nobody would ever see them. So that leads people to speculate, as you were saying. A lot of history and archaeology is speculation made up as that maybe these were carvings not to be seen by the living, but actually to be seen by the ancestors, the dead, the people that were looking down. They do it in churches. There's decorations high up in the top of a church. Where nobody had ever.
Yeah, nobody's ever going to see
for the glory of God.
Yeah,
God's up there, and you can see that.
And an interesting kind of something that ties into that is when the Calderstones were moved. In between them being cleared up and then put in this circle, they were sort of taken away for a little while, and they were stored in like a farmer's yard, weren't they? When they came back, then at least one of them might have got mixed up with something else, because there was a stone standing in a field not far away, which came to be called Robin Hood Stone,
right?
And that bears more resemblance to the other Calderstones than one of the Calderstones, which hasn't hardly got any carvings on it.
Right.
Now, Robin Hood Stone is still there. It stands very close to Booker Avenue. Yeah, Booker Avenue School, and what's the road called? The road called Archerfield Road.
Archerfield Road. Yeah.
So they had to move it, but it's got railings round it, and it just stands there, and it's where the ice cream van parks when the kids come out of school. And it's fantastic to see, because you see all these kids, it's just down the road from my house, see all these kids queuing up getting the ice creams and everything, and nobody looks at it. It is completely invisible, and it's like 7 foot tall.
Wow.
Big massive sandstone slab,
big score marks.
Score marks, which was what they said was where people used to sharpen arrows, or where the druids used to let the blood run.
Flow, yeah.
Right.
But the interesting thing about it is, when they moved it and buried it in exactly the same configuration the way up it had been, and the way up it is, it's got no markings on it at all, but under the ground it's covered in these.
Wow.
It's got all these, and they reckon somebody had said that, oh right, well, if it was originally here, maybe it was a signpost to the dead that the Calderstones monument was that way, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's more likely it was just one of the Calderstones and it's got mixed up.
Mm.
But it's it's a lovely thing to see in the wild, as it were. You know,
Yeah.
you see it just on this street corner, and nobody gives it a second look.
Yeah.
There's a fantastic fella called Ken Brophy, is it? The urban prehistorian. He's a Scottish academic from Glasgow. He does a blog, The Urban Prehistorian, and he basically looks at urban prehistory, so stuff like you saying, like Oswald Stone and stuff that is. Yeah. It's because you've got to remember our cities and our towns and where we live today. We've lived in the same places over and over. There's a reason we live in these places, because they're good places. They've got fertile soil, they've got good water supplies, etc.
Yeah.
So of course we're literally walking on the landscape of our ancestors, and of course they leave their remains behind. And like you say, just in the corner of a suburban 1930s, housing estate, there's this monumental prehistoric stone that probably hundreds walk past every day
and don't even see.
Notice.
But up in Scotland, where Kenny's based, then. There's so much of it. It's fantastic the work he does, because a lot of these Scottish council estates will just suddenly have a standing stone in the middle of it. And the thing that Kenny really likes is, he says, there'll be graffiti on them, people will sit on them and have a drink, and you'll see all the cans around them and all the rest of it. And he says, this is kind of this amazing interaction between history and modern day, because it's not so much people kind of disrespecting it, it's them going, how we'd go, there's that big tree that you go and sit under, or everybody's just like, you go and sit, we all go and get stoned and sit round the stones kind of thing. It's just a thing that happens.
Stoned in more ways than one.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So he's he's chronicling a lot of these places in Scotland that like you wouldn't know existed, and I say, the people probably don't ever think about what they are. It's just like, there's that.
Well, yeah, that's the eternal riddle with these bloody things. I mean, obviously the Calderstones thing was a burial mound, that's been bashed about, and it's ended up, make it into a nice rockery, for want of a
pretty much.
I suppose we're talking about times when people were building follies, so it's probably like, he's got a stone circle, I want one on my land.
Yeah,
but
Spinal Tap, though.
Well, but I mean, when things are genuine standing stones, such as Stonehenge or Callanish or wherever these places are, I mean, I suppose there's no answer to this question, but what was the purpose of them? I mean, literally, what was the purpose of them? It's so interesting that, I mean, there's so much conjecture about the date of the Great Pyramids, and there's so much conjecture about the date of the Sphinx and all these other things.
Yeah.
The Egyptian ones, the Board of Antiquities, they say they're 2,500 years old, whereas people say, no, that's impossible because of water erosion on the Sphinx.
Yeah.
And then the strange thing about the Great Pyramids is, the 3 pyramids of Giza, is that they encase older structures.
Yeah.
And they didn't face off the older structure and just clad it in new rock. They went to great pains to carve the new rock so it fit exactly over the old structure. So maybe the renovation was 2,500 years old, but it's like, what was so important 2,500 years ago that all the way across the Western world that they were constructing these things? Because I think it's such a sketchy picture of prehistory, and everything gets redated. It's like, I'm sure you've heard of that Göbekli Tepe in Turkey.
In Turkey. Wow, what a place.
The underground city. So they originally dated that at 2,500 years, didn't they? But then they've carbon dated, it's 12,500 years old. Yeah. So, I mean, it's really tempting to speculate, especially if you've sort of read anything like Graham Hancock or anything like that, and Lost Civilizations or Von Daniken or something like that. Especially when I was a kid, I don't know if you remember Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World and things like that. That was, really fascinating. And there's that innate curiosity within human beings to want to know, and where there is no knowledge, to fabricate.
Yeah.
And it's so difficult to chop that away and get at the facts.
Yeah. Well, the facts are so scant. That's the thing, and the facts are so scant with recent history as well, because saying about the underground city, we've got our own Joseph Williamson and the Williamson tunnels, and we still haven't got a bloody clue about so much of that.
200 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. That's something I don't know much about. So these things, haven't they found more and more bits of it as the years have gone on? And who was Joseph Williamson, for example? I only know him as a name.
Okay. Well, the story was that he was a philanthropist. He was a man who'd made his money in tobacco
trade.
Yeah, tobacco trade. And basically, after which war?
Napoleonic
Wars.
There we go.
Then he had to. He decided he was going to provide work and training for a load of men. And so he had these tunnels built, and they learned to do these amazing vaulted tunnels, brickwork, and they built the tunnels that for the original Lime Street tunnels, and it was his men who did it. But the tunnels that he had them built were pointless. They didn't go anywhere. They didn't do anything, and they were unmapped as well, because it was just a training exercise in one version of the story.
The amazing thing about the Williamson tunnels is the fact that, you know, you've got this wealthy tobacco merchant, Joseph Williamson, made his fortune, didn't come from, as far as we know, didn't come from much money, was from very poor backgrounds, made his money, as Liverpool was the boom town of those days. I always say Liverpool was the Dubai of the 19th century. It was the town that was nothing and then suddenly rose to become one of the greatest cities in the world. Yeah. And he got onto that first boom and made his fortune. And then, when he saw these unemployed men coming back from the Napoleonic Wars, whether he did it out of pure philanthropy, you know, wanting to help people, whether he did it because he, you know, saw which way the wind was blowing. You've got to remember, within a couple of years of the end of the Napoleonic War, you had the Peterloo Massacre. You know, Britain was on the knife edge of revolting against the upper classes. You know, the French Revolution was fresh on people's minds less than 20 years ago. You know, and there was no representation, there was no votes for people, and the devil makes work for idle hands. And apparently Joseph Williamson said, I look around me and I see unemployed men standing on street corners. If I give them money, then I see drunk unemployed men standing on street corners. Right. So I'll give them jobs.
So very biblical as well, obviously, the whole give a man a fishing rod instead of a fish or whatever it was. You know.
Tin of tuna.
Yeah, give him a tin of tuna and then he ate for a day,
But him and his wife were quite religious as well, and you know, one of his tunnels was supposed to have gone from under their house to the church, so that they could go, you know, they could arrive in church without having to pass through the streets. Another one was supposed to go to his local pub so he could get there, but obviously, you know, this conjecture creeps in. People also say, well, maybe it was the religious stuff. Maybe he was trying to build some sort of shelter. Maybe they were trying to build some kind of maybe if it all kicked off, you know, maybe if the revolution did come, maybe there was somewhere to hide out that was well stocked.
I haven't been down the Williamson Tunnel. I wouldn't want to live down there.
No, but he apparently quite liked it, didn't he? Because he
called him a troglodyte.
Yeah, he would live. He lived underground a lot of the time.
Or his nickname is the Mole of Edgehill, because the tunnels were in Edgehill.
So you've been down there. What, do they go to the church? Do they go to the local pub?
Well, you see, they were all filled in because as soon as he died, it just stopped. You know, there was nobody else was going to get that.
He didn't have any kids.
He didn't have any kids, and nobody knew exactly what was going on anyway. So it just stopped. They bricked them up pretty soon, and then everybody just dumped stuff into them. So they're a fantastic resource of all this historical stuff, because everybody just used to dump their rubbish into them. They dig pits, so they just dig out clay pipes and everything. But because it's unmapped, the friends of Williamson's tunnels, they just spend their spare time digging them out, seeing where they go. And you know, it's an ongoing thing. It's been going on for how long now? 15 years.
Probably 15 years.
Right, so they're still nowhere near excavating the whole system.
No. I mean, they don't know how big it is.
Don't know how big it is. It's all been done by volunteers at the Williamson Tunnels Heritage Centre down on Smithdown Lane, and then on Mason Street and Patton. So there's 3 sites, all within a couple of 100 yards of each other. But at one time, the entire network would have linked up, so all 3 sites would have been connected. But at the moment, they're not, because of things being built in the meantime. And one of the biggest things that blocked them up or stopped them being connected was some fella called Stevenson with a railway. And the story goes that when Stevenson's navvies were digging the first part of the railway, apparently they were totally unaware that a few feet away from them, Joseph Williamson's men were also digging their tunnels.
Right.
And you can imagine the scene, the navvies there, big husky navvies, cutting away, and they take a little breather, and in the meantime you just hear this on the walls. What the hell's that? One navvy takes his axe, smashes it into the wall crumbles away. Instead of solid rock, a void opens up.
Right.
And these faces appearing at him from the darkness. Well, this Irish navvy, deeply religious man, not very well educated, thinks I'm 60 feet underground.
The devil himself.
I've got things coming up. Drops his tools and scarpers. And apparently the story gets better, because it says that Stevenson himself, you know, the great railway engineer, comes down to investigate, see why all his men have downed the tools and buggered off. And he comes face to face with Joseph Williamson.
Right.
And these 2 men face each other off in the tunnel. On one side, you've got the greatest railway engineer of the age, Stephenson, and on the other side, you've got the mad mole of Edge Hill, Williamson.
This sounds like a steampunk graphic novel, doesn't it?
And Williamson apparently looks at Stephenson straight in the eye and says, "Mr. Stephenson, if you want to know about building tunnels, I shall teach you a lesson in the art."
Right.
So, modest. No,
I'm sure. So these guys went on to be the tunnel builders that were required, I'm presuming.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying.
Skilled men. They'd build any of the... I mean, you just look down at the docks in Liverpool and see the amount of brick arches and stonework that's in there.
But when you come into Lime Street, you can still see
beautiful.
the cutting as you go through the cutting. You can see where the old station used to be, can't you? And the old station is all carved out of the rock, and that's all the Williamson stuff.
Yeah, I remember the first time coming into Liverpool. That I used to love that section. You know, we won't get into the getting off at Edge Hill saying.
No,
we all know
tonight,
what
Michael.
that is. No, not tonight. But I remember after Edge Hill, it gets very interesting, and you can see all the life going on up there, can't it? It's certainly a feat of engineering. I mean, but do you remember with Lime Street they used to have that row of grotty shops in front of the facade at the front? Thank God they've got rid of that now. Whoever thought it was a good idea to cover up that beauty?
Although the little Greasy Spoon Cafe was missed.
Well, you know, you can go to the Wetherspoons now, can't you?
I got a pint at 11 o'clock.
Yeah. But I mean, it's certainly tempting to speculate, going back to what we were saying about the Neolithic civilization. Because there's so many... I remember speaking to a guy years ago who said, do you think that was pre-contact, you know, with before Columbus got to the Americas? Do you think that there was any kind of pre-Columbian contact? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, why do you think that? He said, we're there. We got there. There were people there. You know, so obviously, you know, there was some kind of pre-contact. I do love the idea that we had some kind of, you know, worldwide civilization that we've forgotten about, and some kind of common ground back then.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure how far you mean as in worldwide civilization, but
There's 2,500 years.
I think this idea that people have of the past, that everybody just sat in their village watching moss grow, I just think it's absolutely rubbish. We're a social species. We thrive on contact with each other. I had a lecturer at university into Old English, Dr. Alaric Hall, and he posited the question. He said, most of these tribes must have been multilingual or bilingual, or certainly the leaders of the tribes must have been able to speak numerous languages to conduct the diplomacy and the trade and the... I mean, you find bits of random pottery all over the world. How the heck did this get in? There's records of bits of Chinese script been found in South America.
Yeah, and the tobacco in the bodies of the mummies and the cocaine in the bodies of the mummies that they claimed was contamination in the 70s, so they retested them and found more.
In the 70s, everything was a bit contaminated.
Well, of course, but since then they've retested because of that, you know. But it is that stuff.
We're a social species. We need to contact with each other. We need to talk, and we need to.
But I think in addition to that as well, you know, what we're talking about, saying about the conjecture, and also the seeing the importance of things, but not knowing the meaning of them. Obviously, that's been going on so long as well. So people have seen these things and not understood what they are, but still gone, this was dead important once to someone. Let's keep it. You know, back to the Calderstones when the actual earliest records, they found a record earlier than the border dispute in the end, didn't they? Because they got the testimony of somebody, and it was somebody who had seen them dig the burial
house,
dig it out, because they got the sand and they built a house and they used all stuff. But one of the things they got out of it was burial urns, and the burial urns aren't Neolithic.
Right.
So the burial urns prove that it was in use as a place of burial for a period of thousands. Yeah.
So what? The urns exist.
They did. I think the last story of them, that were used as bowling pins in a loft in a farmhouse in Wilton. Basically.
So how were they accurately dated when they went missing so long ago?
The Neolithic people, as far as we know, they didn't bury in urns.
So these urns would have had what? Burnt?
Ashes.
As far as you know, the Neolithic people generally buried the bones in sort of communal bone pits in the centre of the mound. What you often find is that 1,000 years later, the Bronze Age, the Bronze Age people reuse these prehistoric sites, and they dig into the mounds and they bury urns with the body, with the remains in them. And what's really fascinating is that just About 2 miles away from Calderstones, you've got Wavertree, where I live. And round the corner from my house is a Victorian estate. And one of the buildings in the estate is known as Urn House. And if you look at the side of it, it's got a modern, I say modern, Victorian, like, urn stuck on the side of it, like a little panel. And the reason for that is when they were building the foundations of that house in the 1880s or 1890s, they actually discovered more burial urns, which you can see, which are in the Liverpool Museum.
Oh, okay.
So they're, again, Iron Age or Bronze Age urns, you know, from that period. So you've got the Calderstones, which had urns. You've got 2 miles away, more Bronze Age urns. And then, about 2 or 3 years ago, a good friend of mine, an archaeologist called Dean Patton from Chester, over that way, he was doing some school archaeology on Moss Pit School, which is almost exactly between Wavertree and Calderstones. And it was just one of these things where they were, you know, they weren't expecting to find anything. It was just to teach the kids a bit about archaeology, just have a dig in the ground. If we're lucky, we'll find some Victorian pottery, you know, some garden waste or something like that. And he said this kid pulled out this tiny little fragment, you know, about an inch across, and he looked at it and he thought, no, it can't be. It can't be. So he packaged it up in a little plastic bag, as they do, and he sent it to his mate, who was a pottery expert. Bronze Age pot.
Right.
It's incredibly rare to find that. It's very, very rare. And to find it on a school dig that was just done for, you know, it wasn't a recognised archaeological site as such. But, I mean, it just shows you that there must have been a thriving community in the Bronze Age around this period.
Well, there must have been. I mean, I know that all the salt came from the Northwich area, didn't it? Because there's that Cheshire Basin. So that must have been a very important part of the Roman Empire. I mean, they called Britain the breadbasket of the Roman Empire, didn't they? This is where they grew all the grain. And I know that in Cheshire, that was where they got all the salt from. And they had Chester there, obviously, and Manchester. I always find it really, really interesting that Liverpool seems to have nothing pre 16th, 17th century. And I don't particularly understand why that is. It's like, is that non-curation? Is that...
I think you've got to look at geography. And I think what it is really... the reason... What I think is that Liverpool was probably very busy in the prehistoric period.
Right.
When we relied a lot more on sort of living close to our food sources. And what I mean by that is because Liverpool is quite a boggy, wet sort of area. So the people who are hunting and stuff, you know, wetlands are fertile, thriving environments for food and stuff. So the ideal place for prehistoric tribes to settle down and, you know, hunt and gather, etc. By the time you get to the Roman period, of course, developed a lot more agriculture and stuff. Boggy wetland isn't very good for growing grains in.
Right.
So the rest of, you know, Manchester and Cheshire and that sort of area, I just think Liverpool's a bit boggy and a bit out the way and a little bit...
you've reminded me. Isn't a lot of it reclaimed when you go further up? Isn't Ormskirk and places?
Well, there was a glacial shelf, wasn't there, I think, somewhere
That's
around
right,
there.
So there's a lot of reclaimed land, isn't there? So I suppose that explains a lot.
But even into the post-Roman period, you see it with the settlement names. So obviously after the Romans, you got the sort of Viking invasions and periods like that. And the Saxons, the natives, were being thrown out. If you go and look at the place names in Liverpool going inland, the best one is Huyton and Roby, which are not far. Huyton is an Anglo-Saxon name.
B-wise Norse, isn't it?
Yeah.
Roby.
Huyton is an Anglo-Saxon. It means the settlement on the hill.
Right.
Roby is B-Y means settlement. It's the settlement of Robe or
well, it's like Kirkby or Formby or Crosby and all. Yeah.
And Roby is a little bit lower than Huyton. The ground isn't as fertile, isn't as nice. So these Norse invaders coming over, I say invaders, these settlers, because in this part of the world we don't think they were that violent. They more.
Well, they got given the Danelaw, didn't they? And I'm not entirely certain where that crosses where we are.
But they settled, and basically the less good land towards the coast, which was boggier and less productive and wetter, that ended up going to the Norsemen who had arrived. And as soon as you get a bit further inland, you get all these Saxon settlements on the high ground, on the hills. It's drier, it's nicer, it's you know. So even going in the post-Roman period, you see the effect of geography upon landscape and people.
I think the neglect continues when the Normans come in, because there's not that many sort of French type names here. I mean, there's an interesting schizophrenia with our language, for example, in terms of who did the work and who did the the enjoyment of the work, insofar as you've got the Saxon word for the animal being the cow, but the Norman word for the product being beef, because they enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting what you say about language, because it tells you so much more about the demographic of the place, I suppose, doesn't it? Because of what stuck.
Well, and Toxteth is supposedly a Viking name,
right?
But that's not stuck because it was a thriving Viking settlement. It's stuck because nobody else wanted it after that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean.
That's a lot of what the Liverpool stuff's like. People are like, you can have that bit, and then they go, I'm not really bothered about that, and then it's called that for 600 years or whatever.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I mean, Calderstones, I presume, is quite a modern.
Nobody really knows.
No.
The stones were already called the Coldway.
Coldway stones, is the earliest one.
Which might just be because of the boundary district. It might be to do with Mr.
Really,
Coldway or
Mr. Coldway, whoever he was.
But all that Druids Cross Road and all that's obviously modern, isn't it?
That's come because
of
the.
I love that.
Oh, I do. I've always loved those little funny names.
Because it's the way that, obviously, we know it's rubbish, and the Calderstones weren't anything to actually do with the Druids because they were much later. But it's the fact that at the time when they were laying out those estates, somebody knew of that mythical link.
Yeah.
And thought, we'll keep that alive in the street plan in the area.
Yeah. There's a few of them, isn't there? There's Druids Cross Road.
Druidsville.
It's Druidsville one, is it?
Druidsville.
Fantastic.
I like the name Druidsville.
Great name for a band.
Druidsville.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great, and I think it's one of the really nice things about looking at landscape and looking at areas and seeing how they've changed or not changed. And the fact that these things survive, and we've got a real need to keep the past alive in some way, and we like that as humans, don't we? And I think that's the important thing with the Calderstones, is as they were built as a burial monument, and you mentioned the pyramids before, why did suddenly at this period in sort of
I don't know, and there's a lot of people don't think the pyramids were for burial.
No,
there's a lot of people who don't think they were burial chambers whatsoever.
Yes.
It's just a modern spin that we've put onto it. I agree that the likes of the Calderstones and that were burial mounds, because you've got so much to compare it with.
Does that mean they were just burial mounds? Could they not just be used as a burial mound that was also something else?
Yeah.
It was also used? I mean, the thing I was talking to one of the, an archaeologist, because I was involved in the Calderstones for a while, and I asked him, he's an expert on prehistory, and I said, well, because I remember once I was looking at Calderstones Park in the summer, and I noticed how quickly the grass was growing, and every 2 weeks the gardeners would be out and they'd mow it all back. And I thought, if you've got this monument standing there and you only visit it one time a year on the solstice to come and do whatever your ritual was, if you had one, who's keeping it tidy? Who's stopping the trees growing in it? Who's stopping the plants growing?
Yeah.
Could maybe part of the ceremony was a ritual cleansing of it, the way they do the chalk figures on the hills.
Yeah.
They carve them out every year.
Yeah.
Maybe that was part of it, or we're a particular bunch of people, the guardians, the curators of it, if you like.
Yeah, was it a permanent thing or
permanent on a day-to-day basis? I mean, you know what it's like in this country. If you leave something for 3 or 4 weeks, it's overgrown in the summer.
Almost certainly.
Yeah. So, and I asked this to this professor, this doctor, and he went, "Don't know. Nobody's asked that question of me before." He wouldn't know, would he? And we couldn't know.
Yeah.
But it just shows you we don't know.
But even if you think of, I live very close to Allerton Cemetery, and it's sort of, it's a brilliant big green space. It's a good place to. It's where my mum walks her dog, and it's where I take my kids quite often for a bike ride and all the rest of it. And I think especially in the last, because I grew up very close to there. I grew up in Hunts Cross, and I remember the cemetery being quite a sort of forbidden kind of, a bit of a spooky place when I was a kid. But now, basically with the advent of solar powered lights, cemeteries are these very different spaces. They're these really bright and airy spaces. But I think it means that when I go through the cemetery now, quite often, I'll see people who go there for somebody's birthday, to celebrate.
Yeah.
And they actually have a little party there. They sit on the bench, and there's people who sit and have a barbecue or things like that. And that wouldn't have happened kind of 20 years ago.
No, certainly not.
But
I've never seen barbecues in a cemetery.
Yeah, it really.
Yeah, the crematorium.
But it always makes me think, this is possibly more in line with what people used to do with we always think of them as these kind of, there's the white-robed druids and everybody's processing along really miserably and, probably humming something really solemn. But actually, possibly, people with their communing with the ancestors, and, that sounds like a really airy-fairy kind of, but
no, I think
we all go and visit graves of people, and we go, oh, it's your birthday. It's people are leaving helium balloons there now, and I see people who go and light a candle every night on a grave because they must live very close. It's not like they're making a big pilgrimage to do it, but at the same time, it's quite a primal kind of thing to go, well, I'll go and light the candle, and in the morning I'll put it out again. And that seems just very human and very normal. And, when you think about these sacred spaces, it's like you say, you're thinking of these people who you're so cut off from, they're a different species kind of thing. But once you start thinking about it in those terms, you want to go and see the grave of somebody because you want to remember this stuff, you want to share this stuff, you want to say to the kids, oh, remember, you won't remember this, but Grandad was like this. It seems soft to say it, but it makes a lot more sense than how we tend to think of it, I think.
Well, there's a peculiarity, isn't there? We're probably the only species on the planet that is both aware of our own mortality and celebrates those that went before us in some kind of, it's respectful, and it's almost as if we need to venerate our ancestors to validate ourselves. It's a strange thing, and I speak from personal experience because, having lost my mum and all that, and we're like that. It's tempting to speculate what relationship they would have had with death. And like you say, because all this respectful stuff and things like that is quite a Victorian artifice anyway. And then when we look at these people, it's very difficult to not look through like Tolkien-esque spectacles, isn't it? We romanticise so much. I'm trying to think who did all those bloody paintings of like the Lady of La Motte and I'm trying to think of all those things, those Raphael-esque things that we associate. We see all these things, but the actual people were in every single way possible much more practical than we are. For example, if civilization came to an end now, these people that we regard as primitive and stupid could kick our ass in terms of survival. We wouldn't last 5 minutes. As soon as the beans run out, we're screwed. But they'd know what to do.
But they couldn't Google for an Uber, could they?
Well, you couldn't Google for anything. But if you're in a position where you are facing death on a daily basis, for example, be that you're frightened of starving, you're frightened of being killed, you're frightened of getting sick and dying. If your relationship with death is much more proximal, then maybe it makes sense to me that you'd want to keep something happy. So it doesn't get you, whatever that may be, whether that be a solstice celebration. I know it sounds laughable to us that when the sun doesn't move after the 21st for 3 days, and this is what they say is the origin of the Christian myth, isn't it? The sun dies for 3 days and rises again. But, I don't think that is in any way surprising. It's like, all right, but this year it might not. And so all these things come together, and then probably with a huge dose of hallucinogenic drugs in terms of mushrooms and things like that. There's a great book called I think it's The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. Have you ever heard of that book? And that tells you all about the flyagaric mushroom, and it's very expensive because it went out of print about 45 years ago, didn't it? And what they do is they tie in the hallucinogenic mushroom fertility rites of Eastern Europe with the crossover with modern Christianity, and they claim that Christmas was, because the flyagaric is a red mushroom with white spots, and that's where Santa's outfit,
and that's why it's the reindeer that take him flying as well, because of the reindeer
they ate
piss
them
thing.
And all that, the rainbow piss.
You know about witches, don't you, and hallucinogenics?
Go on, enlighten me.
Apparently, one of the tropes, one of the myths of the broomstick was that it was actually a hallucinogenic applied to it that was applied via the
because you didn't want to eat it because it'll make you sick, but you've 2 mucous membranes.
There's another way to get it into your body.
Right, well that makes sense. Well, they knew what they were doing up in Pendle, then they're chucking them all in the water. Well, there's another period in history where the whole world went insane. all that Witchfinder General time and all this sort of. I mean, there's so many interactions with this altered states of consciousness that change things. There used to be that old thing about was it ergot that was
the bread thing? Yeah, the thing that grows on wheat, and then that was werewolf, an outbreak of lycanthropy in Europe, wasn't it? Because of the ergot poisoning. All the wood cuttings.
St. Vitus' dance as well.
Is that? Yeah, maybe that's
St. Vitus dance. That was me nan. That is like, you got bloody St. Vitus dance because you couldn't sit still. The last time that happened was in the 60s that a village tripped like that somewhere in Italy. Yeah, I remember reading about that. And
it was the 60s then.
It was the 60s, and it was Italy. But I recall reading years ago that the last woman to be tried under witchcraft laws was during World War II. Did you ever hear
That's
about
right,
that?
yeah, but that was actually because it was sort of a technicality, because she was pretending to be
a medium, wasn't she?
She pretended to be a medium, and it was more actually that she had some kind of military secret stuff.
Well, she told some woman that her son had died on a ship, didn't she?
Yeah, and so they were.
And it hadn't been announced officially.
That's right.
Nice.
So yeah, they were worried that she was getting her information from somewhere else.
So you know about this, and she had got some. I thought she just got lucky or something.
Well, I don't know. That's the version that I heard. That the whole reason why she was tried under the witchcraft.
I get why she was tried, but I didn't think she was privy to any kind of secret information.
I don't know whether it was ever proved that how she actually got the information. Yeah, maybe it was just an unlucky guess on her behalf.
Yeah, something like that. But it just shows you how thin a line there is.
Yeah,
and I think that we're very much in time where superstition is replacing rationality. And
we've gone back around the circle. What do you mean?
Yeah, well, I think that people are so. No matter how many iPhones you've got, open your can, mate. Don't worry, it doesn't matter. I certainly wouldn't wait.
No. Just waiting for the right moment.
Oh no, there never is one. The right moment's now. I think that human beings are so prone to, sentimentality, fantasy, whatever you want to call it, that we aren't ever very far from demanding that we burn witches.
No, absolutely not.
Or something else. I mean, you're in this age now, I think, where everything's quite volatile and everything's so polarised. Yeah, that you can get an insight into, hang on a minute, it doesn't matter how sophisticated we think we are still the same people that constructed those burial mounds are.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, undoubtedly. And that's one thing that I whenever I speak to people about it, I really try and get across and say, listen, they didn't have the same technology as us. They didn't have the same advanced mathematics or advanced philosophy in terms of, it's all written down by Kant and Descartes and all this sort of stuff. But what's more important than anything else is that their love was the same as our love. Their hate was the same as our hate. Their fear was the same as our fear. Yeah. They're raw emotions that make them human. Because human isn't just about the higher thought. It isn't about this cognitive ability. It's the emotions that make us. The ability for, to self-sacrifice if you needed to put yourself through the extra effort for some reason. The ability to rationalise your own death. Emotional stuff that we have to deal with. They were the same as us.
Absolutely.
They weren't any more primitive or more advanced, and we are only a slither away from them.
Oh, yeah.
And virtually everything that we count as, our advancement is nothing to do with 99.9% of us. We haven't come up with any mathematical formula or conducted
we're
any
on
of
the
these.
shoulders of giants for definite.
Yeah.
But, when people go on about things like the responsibilities of a society, I think that nobody can really disagree with, if it's children, old, and the sick. So no one, I don't know of anyone who could say, that they don't agree that society has a responsibility to take care of those groups of people.
Yeah, can't look after themselves, yeah.
And the archaeological record shows that people who were born with some severe disabilities actually lived to like 30 and 40 years of age, from the burials and stuff. So if people were able to live that long in a dog-eat-dog society, they were looked after.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And I think that gives you the best, insight you can have to, this is a basic human characteristic. We are meant to look after disadvantaged people. We've always been doing it.
Yeah.
Long before it was, some kind of social construct, as people say, and, nowadays we all feel we have to. And no, we were doing it.
Yeah.
We were doing it.
This is, again, amazingly ties in with something very linked to the Calderstones. Because on the Calderstones, it's covered with these spirals that we talked about. What we haven't talked about is the footprints and the handprints and basically the digits. Basically, a sort of, some people call them footprints, some people call them handprints. Whatever they are human forms, and they're not prints. They're carved representations of feet. And depending on which way you look at it in the light, some of these feet have 6 toes.
Wow.
So you're sort of thinking, was this somebody who had an extra toe? They were considered slightly special.
Right.
You know, were they, it's not a massive disability, but...
And it's quite common as well, yeah.
Fairly common.
It's a thing that happens.
Were they given a sort of special sort of status of this? Were they,
Well, there was the fantastic thing that happened, because we've done some open days where we've been in, been in the little shed, as it is pretty much, that the Calderstones are kept in. And you have conversations with people who come in and they remember when the stones were in different places, or they claim to, even though they haven't been in the other place for a very long... That's a weird one. But there was the one time when a woman came in, and when you have the open day, you're all right to go up and touch them. You're not all right to rub them or
Are they still in perspex?
They're in a giant greenhouse.
Yes.
I say giant.
Right.
Smallish greenhouse in the side of the park.
Yeah.
Right.
But you're all right to go up and sort of have a touch of them and examine them from all angles. But she went up to the 6-toed foot or 6-fingered hand, whichever it is, and she went and she sort of put her hand into it, which is fair enough. And then she said to me, "Oh, it's a healing hand, isn't it? It's the healing hand." And I said, "Oh, I don't know. I've never heard it called that before." And she said, "Oh, yeah, because if you've got 6 fingers on your hand, that's a healing hand, isn't it?" I said, "Oh, I haven't really heard that." And she said, "Oh, yeah, my mum's got 6 fingers on her hands, and they always said that's the healing hand." But there was no other context to it, but it was just weird to see her kind of go up, connect with it, and go, "I know exactly what that is.
Understand exactly.
Yeah, I know exactly what it means." And then that was it. She was gone. You know what I mean? And yeah, we're always saying nobody knows what these carvings mean. But maybe we do. Maybe some people just go up to it and know exactly what it means.
Yeah, it is strange because so many things, unless they're recorded by someone, they're lost.
Yeah.
And I don't know where you stand on this. I mean, people say that there was no kind of written folklore or record of the people who were here before the Romans, and then others say, yeah, there was, and the Romans destroyed it. From what you've said, it doesn't sound like there's any kind of, alphabet or any languages but these spirals could be some form of what would that be? Petroglyphs? Is that the oldest?
Petroglyphs is the right word.
Right.
Yeah.
What I think's amazing about them is that you might have the Lascaux caves in France.
Yes, the oldest drawings.
The oldest drawings, and they're figurative. So they show animals and men hunting them.
Incredibly beautiful, aren't they?
Oh, honestly, gorgeous. But they're figurative. They literally represent what they're meant to draw. So what looks like an elk or an oxen or whatever looks like an elk, like an oxen.
Yeah.
What's meant to look like a hunter with a spear looks like a hunter with a spear.
Yeah.
These are entirely abstract on the Calderstones. We've already made that artistic jump from the figurative to the abstract.
Right.
People often think about that. Oh, that's obviously Picasso's sort of era. Late 19th, early 20th century sort of stuff. When you get no, we did it thousands of years ago. We already understood the power of symbols over just
but that's so hard to get your head around, because when you see the spirals, you think it's because they can't write. You imagine them kind of go just doing
What's
that.
An easy shape
that's
to
not
draw?
That's not what's happened even slightly. There's definite meaning behind them, or purpose. Because that's it. What's the meaning? They might have a purpose, but not a meaning as such. They're part of something wider.
By the way, I'm not suggesting the people who did the Lascaux caves did the Calderstones.
I do certainly think there's some kind of connection in some way between all those people in that area. But I mean, with the spiral thing, so do you think that that's possibly some kind of, the eternal symbol or whatever it is? I mean, it doesn't really look it though, because there's a definite centre, isn't there?
Yeah, well, I mean, the one that I've got the tattoo of is it's taken from when they did the moulds of the Calderstone. So these were the best preserved versions of them, but they're still not very complete because the moulds peeled the surface off quite a lot.
Yeah.
I think that when you look at the labyrinth, which is carved on a lot of things, it seems to be the similar structure.
So what's the significance of the labyrinth, at least in classical knowledge? What do they think of that?
Well, it's because the difference between a labyrinth and a maze is there's only one route through a labyrinth, and you always get to the centre, but it's a way of getting from A to B via this massively circuitous route.
Right.
So it's a religious thing as far as most people can see.
Well, the labyrinth, as far as I know, isn't that the Minotaur?
The Minotaur,
is that
yeah.
right? And that then, as I believe, I'm probably wrong, but as far as I can remember, I'm sure that the labyrinth thing feeds into, Mithraism, which was the old religion, wasn't it? I think I'm right in saying that in ancient Rome they had a meeting where they decided which religion they were going to choose to enslave the planet, and Christianity won. at least that's the cynical view of it. But one of the religions in the running for it was Mithraism, which I think was born in ancient Iran, wasn't it?
There's the big Mithras temple in
London, which has just been opened, hasn't it? Basically, there's a Mithratic temple in London, because the cult of Mithras, if I'm right, was followed by a lot of the Roman army. So the Roman army sort of adopted Mithras as their sort of cult figure. So obviously they're spread right across the empire from Iran almost all the way to Scotland. So it's not unusual. You'd expect to find one in London. But yeah, I'm not entirely up there with
the cult of Mithra. As far as the sort of. Do you remember that film years ago? God, what was it called now? Zeitgeist. Do you remember that?
Yeah, Zeitgeist Ken.
It was like a documentary some guy in America put together. Yeah. And it started off with Christianity and saying that pre-Christianity listed like Dionysus and Mithra and all these people that were born of a virgin and died on a cross. And
that's a common theme.
So he said, but there's also since then I've heard people debunk it and say actually that's not true. But according to what he said in that movie, Mithra was born of a virgin and died on a cross and rose after 3 days. So I've no idea if that's true. I'd be probably upsetting a lot of people if I said that. But so it at least peripherally on the surface sounds very like Christianity, but it is fascinating to think that because we're in a world where everything's been defined over the last 2,000 years more or less. We're in a world where Western civilization is actually not really that much. When you think of the globe, when you think of how many people are on the globe, we think we have this overinflated sense of importance, don't we?
Yeah.
And we think that be it Hollywood or be it the Premier League or everything's the biggest in the world. We're the when actually there are billions and billions of people who would beg to differ.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, this is a really interesting point, and coming back to what you said about, again, sorry to bring it back to the cold stones, but
please do.
It's a great way to do it. Petroglyphs, which you mentioned, rock art is literally how it translates.
Rock art. You've got to say like Tommy Vance.
Rock art.
Rock art.
Rock art.
Yeah.
Rock art. It's a dead medium in this country and in most of Europe, in fact most of the world. We don't have a living tradition of rock art. We look at the carvings from the past and we go, that was done then, we can't understand it now. You go to Australia, however.
Right.
The Aboriginals of Australia have kept up a tradition of rock art going back to the earliest days. It's still a living art form. It's different from how they used to do it, but it's just evolved. But it is still, they have a living culture of rock art. They don't look at it as an artistic form from the past, something we can't understand. They have continued it through, and still today in their culture have practitioners who draw these petroglyphs onto their religious site, like Ayers Rock and stuff like that.
Right.
They've got this living tradition of it, which I think is fascinating.
And are there any similarities to be drawn with what are on the Calderstones or European monuments?
Feet and hands, I suppose.
So the feet and hands.
There's still spirals as well. The spiral's a snake, isn't it, in most of the Aboriginal?
Well, that's right. That's why I was wondering if the circular thing was the life.
Well, the amazing thing about this is like these just evolve, so they become different things over time. Because like we were saying about the labyrinth thing, I think these shapes, they evolve into the labyrinth, but then you get the stuff to do with the myths, and you get this thing where there are turf mazes in Britain. Which they're called turf mazes. They're actually little labyrinths, and there's only like 6 of them left now. But they're a bit like the chalk outlines.
Yeah.
People don't know how old they were originally,
Right.
because if you don't keep them up, they disappear. But they're just these little things that you're supposed to walk around. Now, loads of them are known as the Game of Troy, because they've got this association with the Roman stuff, with the classical myths, but they might be older than that anyway. It's because like the term labyrinth starts to come into it and go, well, that's like the things that we've got. But we've had all once when you've got organic things that aren't rock. When you've got a turf maze, once it gets overgrown, that's it.
Yeah.
It's gone.
So what's a turf maze? I've never heard that.
They're
phrase
literally just they're just a labyrinth that will be cut into turf.
Before. Is
and
this
then,
a feature of sort of an ornamental garden or something?
well,
that you're about?
they might do it. They did do some Victorian ones, but the ones that
Oh, so there's ones going back that far.
Well,
maybe not prehistoric. But
they don't know.
the age
They
of
don't
it.
know how old they are. Like I think the oldest one might be 12th.
Possibly.
12th century, something like that. But they know it's a copy of one that used to be nearby.
right,
So it's a thing where somebody went, I'm going to do something with that land. You need to redo.
right.
But there used to be. Some people think there used to be one per village, almost kind of thing.
Wow.
And the Game of Troy, the idea of this is a thing that. So as well as all the history stuff and all that, I'm well into weird fiction and all that kind of thing. And there's this brilliant crossover where you get like people like Robert Aikman and Arthur Machen and H.P. Lovecraft and all of those people who draw on these things. And Machen did this an amazing story called The White People about elves and fairies. And in it, there's this girl who she's kept a diary of all her things, her doings with the elves and the fairies. But it's fantastically kind of. It's the diary of a child who knows all these magical things. So it's really creepy because you don't get half of it. But one of the things in that is the Game of Troy. I hear being taught about the Game of Troy.
Right.
And it was purely from reading that I was like, what is that? Researched it backwards and then was like, suddenly you get so far back and then you're like, come to Shropshire where you can come and enjoy the beauty. And it's like, oh, it's so weird that you can go from this really frightening thing to Britain's oldest turf maze and the connection between the two of them. And obviously that's like we're saying, it's the storytelling edge and everything, but it is the fact that you go, we don't know what this stuff was for. We don't know. You want to preserve it, you want to keep it alive, but well,
one of the ones isn't one the Cyrus Abbott man? Is that right? Isn't that a the figure on the hillside in chalk? But since Victorian times, they've been progressively making his cock smaller. It's the Stone Age cutting of the. You know the one. I mean.
Yeah.
I think it's the Cyrus Abbott man. I'm not sure.
Club, hasn't he?
Yeah, and he's got the club. But so they've been sort of cutting less chalk. But the Victorians, because the Victorians also went to Egypt and smashed all the cocks off the statues at the Temple of Karnak.
Yeah.
Because they didn't like that sort of thing.
Did
No.
well, they didn't tell you they liked it.
No, well, that's true. I'm sure that there's a few of them stone cocks hidden away somewhere in the private gentlemen's clubs of London. But
that's what was being bowled at those urns.
That's it. Yeah. A couple of pharaohs knackers. But with you saying about the Temple of Mithra, they were always subterranean, weren't they? They were always underground. Yeah, that's right. I just remember that.
I mean, there's interesting.
But that's feeding into the labyrinthine thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and also the Cobblestones as a passage grave. There was passing into the underground. You had to walk into a dark.
But that's
space.
it, isn't it? The underworld, and we still stick people underground now.
Yeah.
I mean, is it in Nepal? Is it Tibet and places like that where the ground's so rocky they can't bury them? They leave them out to be excarnated.
Yeah.
Where the vultures and
Yeah.
whatever come down. And
There's a place in China, isn't there?
Yeah.
A place where they've got like lumps of like trees stuck in the side of the cliff face, and they put the bodies on there.
No?
Have you seen those stone coffins that you see up and down the country?
Yeah.
There's some in Haitian.
Haitian, just carved into the.
Very odd things. Yeah, so.
Have you seen them?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But I think the bodies were left there to be pecked and eaten, weren't they? I'm not sure.
I think I prefer that way to do it.
Oh, I don't know. Jim Morrison always sings that, "Don't let me die in an automobile, let me die in an open field. I want the birds to eat my eyes." And it's, oh, you dirty bastard.
Tough shit, Jim.
Yeah, well, that's right, yeah.
He was in the bath, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was in the bath, that's right. But isn't there a load of stuff about his coffin was sealed and Stephen King has him turning up in one of his books, just drunk. pulling in at a gas station, which takes you back to fiction, I suppose. Yeah. But that's what it's so tempting to speculate, and I wish there were more definite answers. But then it gives you something to fire the information, to fire the imagination with so much.
Yeah, we don't want definite answers. Definite answers ruin everything.
We never get definite answers.
We're never going to get them. I mean, where do you stand on this kind of alien intervention thing? I won't tell you my opinion, but you know,
I like to entertain it in my drunken moments.
Do you?
Yeah.
Go on. In what way?
Well, yeah, I consider that a sort of rationalist thing, but I've always got this. I mean, me and John both would call ourselves 40.
Oh, hey up.
Hey, what's going on? Oh,
it's the aliens. Yeah.
Maybe you'd better leave it at that.
Yeah.
Touched on something esoteric and dangerous here.
Go on. I'm dying to know.
We consider ourselves Forteans, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know if Charles Fort.
Yeah.
The chap, you know, and he said one measures a circle.
God was a cosmic joker. That was Charles Fort's contention, wasn't it?
We skate on this thin crust known as reality. It was full of the sound bites.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's a great fucking.
And sort of Forteanism, I suppose, sort of takes its premise from we'll never really know exactly what facts are because facts are made to the fashion that they are. You know, it's it treats everything with benign skepticism.
Yeah.
So
right.
Is that? Do you want to?
No, I mean that's true. It's funny because it's difficult, increasingly now, being like a 40 and you know, being somebody who's willing to entertain this stuff.
That's a willingness to entertain alternatives.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to think about these things. Really, it's you know, a mental exercise as much as anything. But you know, I know that I am not an expert in physics and I am not an expert in all sorts of things. You know, so you know, when I read about what's going on at CERN and things like that, I'm very interested in it. But
is that the place in Switzerland?
Yeah. You know, where they're
by Lake Lucerne, isn't it?
The Higgs boson and all that.
Possibly making small black holes.
Maybe making small black holes. I don't really understand it. You know, I accept that it's mainstream stuff, and I'm not skeptical about it. I don't think that they're not doing what they say, but at the same time, I'm not an expert in it. You know, so I treat more fringe things the same way I treat that. You know, but in this day and age, I think it's increasingly dangerous to kind of say that's how your head works because now people are saying that the Earth's flat, and now people are saying
that's insane.
You know,
Terry Pratchett says the best. The problem with an open mind is that it gets full of shit.
Well, that's it.
Very true.
I might have paraphrased, but
that's very true. I think that a lot of this began after 9/11.
Yeah.
This doubting of the very fabric of reality, really. I remember when all these 9/11 conspiracy theories come out and stuff. I hadn't heard any of them, and I remember the guy saying to me, "Oh, have you not heard this guy? Have you not?" And he gave me we had DVDs then still, and he gave me this presentation, this guy, and it was very, very convincing.
Yeah.
There was a lot of convincing stuff, and then I sort of went down that road a bit. But I think that as time has moved on, it seems that to have morphed into sort of like the right wing and funny worlds like that. And I'd never noticed the overlap until the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, it's a strange one. But the thing is, this stuff is convincing when I love to sit and spend, 10, 15 minutes watching one of these YouTube documentaries about was Jimmy Savile a wizard? That was that's one of my favourite ones. And I will sit for 10 or 15 minutes. Now I'll watch this. And
I'm going to find it.
And I will, it's a good one. And I'll be convinced that Jimmy Savile might have been a wizard. And then it stops and I go, that was fucking mad,
Yeah.
And then, reality kicks back in. But the problem is, for some people, reality never kicks back in. They go, I'm skeptical about all these things. Anybody offers an explanation and they go, well, that's the truth now.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with an open mind. It's that like you might suddenly
Well, I think that the problem, a big part of the problem, has come from an ever polarized media, and certainly a news media where you used to put the news on years ago, didn't you? And you'd get a story, and now you seem to get an opinion. So you can see the same story on a couple of different news outlets, and it's a completely different thing because people are always looking for confirmation bias whenever they report anything.
Yeah.
And that fundamentally, I think, is why things like Charles Fort and that appeal to me much more, because it's just much more entertaining. It's more whimsical, and at least it hints that there is more to it than all this.
I think there must be more to it. I mean,
well, I do. I'm not. I mean, I consider I'm rational, but I don't discount the possibility of a supreme being or whatever it may be. Because let's face it, we're not far off now. The supreme being could be a guy in a lab coat.
Yeah.
You can believe in science, and you can believe in a supreme being, a deity, whatever, at the same time.
Yeah.
Because if it's a guy in a lab making life.
Yeah, well, I mean, they say, another one is, now that everything's a simulation, isn't it? They're saying there's a 99%, somebody said
yeah, that we're living in a holographic simulation.
Elon Musk thinks we're living in a simulation.
Yeah, he said we're probably a simulation, aren't we? And the reason, his reasoning for that is very logical. It's the fact if you had a computer that could generate and simulate an entire world, wouldn't you just do hundreds of them, thousands of them, and millions of them if your computer was powerful enough to see how many different permutations could there be? How many games of SimCity have been played over the years?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, it comes back to this sort of thing that you were saying earlier, that we all feel connected, whether we like it or not, don't we? We all sort of we try and split ourselves apart, and now we've got synthetic means of being completely more divided with social media and phones and all that other rubbish. And that seems to just be driving people further and further apart. Yeah. And it seems to be putting a sort of digital interface between what is a more organic connection, I think, that everybody has. And I think that, with the Charles Fort stuff and that's always underpinned by some kind of, sort of celebration of humanity, really.
Yeah.
It's got that very sort of Victorian philanthropic feel to it. One of the best headlines I saw in there was about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it was speculating that because there's a book called Jesus the Man. So that was, that his disciples went and got him out, and they gave him some rare herbs and brought him back to life and took him away, and then he lived in India till he was 105, and that's Isa, isn't it? He's the Muslim prophet. And so they said that they gave him cannabis oil to revive him, and the headline of this 14 Times piece was "Sects and Drugs and Rotten Scrolls." But I used to love the cryptozoology in that as well. That was always really interesting, because we've got things like the Tasmanian tiger. There's footage of that animal, isn't there? It's so bloody.
I actually saw. I was in Manchester Museum today, and I go there quite often because I live near enough to the train station to get to Manchester as easily as Liverpool city centre. And they had a specimen of the Tasmanian tiger, the skull of the Thylocine. Not today. It was a while ago it was last year, I think, in a sort of a touring thing.
Massive jaw, hasn't it? Massive.
Yeah, amazing. Well, the footage shows it yawning, doesn't it? One bit of it, and it's like it's
like half stripy and half. Yeah. It's like a half a zebra body. And, It's a very odd animal. Even
in the museum today with the kids, you're looking at all these specimens, and there was a tree kangaroo there. They've never seen a tree kangaroo before. They're mad looking things.
I've never seen a tree kangaroo.
No, I've not.
Yeah, well, it's like a kangaroo but in a tree. Smaller back legs.
It's got wings.
But there was a thing called a slender loris, which I've never seen before. My God, that terrified me today. I was staring at it for about 10 minutes. It looks like a bush baby. It's got like this big face and big round, but its arms and legs are like pipe cleaners. So it's this horrible skinny looking. It was a very frightening looking thing. But these things, they've got an amphibian bit in there, and they breed amphibians, and we're looking through the glass to see all the tadpoles they've got, and then they've got in there a newly described species of frog, which was just called like Juliet's frog, or it was obviously just the person who discovered it. But there's new things being discovered all the time, and also there's stuff that you look at it and you can't believe it's real. So cryptozoology has always fascinated me, because obviously everybody goes, it's Bigfoot, it's Nessie, it's all that bollocks. But there's new animals still being discovered on a daily basis.
Well, I saw a clip, and I put it on Facebook a while back, and it was a hippo that was obviously running along the bottom of this lake chasing a boat, and you could just see a disturbance in the water, if you like. And then when it came up out of the water, I'll send you the clip, it's absolutely fucking amazing. When it comes up out of the water, with its gob open and that, it is this big, fearsome beast, and they can run 30, 40 mile an hour along the bottom of a lake.
That's it, because they don't swim, do they?
No,
they just
they
run.
run along the bottom. But one of the there were 3 species, I think, categorised of hippopotamus, and one of them, I can't remember the name of it now, but it was a European hippo.
Is that the one they've got a skull of in Leeds or something?
I've no idea, but with them on about the Loch Ness monster,
Right.
I've often wondered if that was a
Was
sort
it hippo?
of
The Loch
a
Ness hippo.
species of European hippo that were cut off after the last ice age or something, because it's been in folklore for hundreds of years, hasn't it? I mean, there might be nothing there now, but it could be something that's a remnant of the ice age or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have a. I always think if there's some kind of story like that, unless it's some invention of, some guy in the 17th century.
But that's it, isn't it? That's the fascinating thing, because these things can have a completely finite starting point, or they can be, lost in the mists of time, as
Yeah.
There's a funny thing because years ago, and I think this is actually how we met originally. Years ago, I wrote a ghost book, like a haunted Liverpool book.
Oh, cool.
Is it still available, John?
I think it's probably available in W.H. Smith's and all good.
And what is the name of the book, John?
It's called 800 Years of Haunted Liverpool, because somebody else has written about 500 haunted Liverpool books. A man called Tom Slemen, who you might have heard of.
No.
So there are haunted.
We'll have him in the house.
Haunted Leeds books, haunted Scotland books, haunted Edinburgh books. This publisher, they do them, and a mate of mine, who is actually a book publisher over in Dublin, he had done a Dublin one, and he said to me, why don't you get in touch with them and do a Liverpool one? So I did the Liverpool one. This is 2007.
Yeah.
So I was ferreting around for material. But basically what I wanted to do was I wanted to get ghost stories off people, or get the classic Liverpool ghost stories. But then I wanted to look into the history of them, and actually go like, okay, let's look at that. Let's see what the basis for this is. So I had flyers in all the libraries, and basically how would people get in touch with me and tell me these cool stories, and then I'd try and research like who used to live in their house and all that sort of thing. And I think I was on a message board, the Yo Liverpool message board, and that's when I sort of met Richard online, because he was doing the same kind of thing. But one of the things that I wrote about was, black dogs. There's the British black dog legend. So there's the stuff in
Black Shuck.
Black Shuck.
That dog don't give a fuck, in the words of the dark.
Exactly. So there is a black dog legend tied in with sort of Merseyside, which is Formby Beach. There's one who's called Old Trash. Now the name should sort of suggest that somebody set it up as some kind of.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when you get back to the first mention of it, it's a Halloween article in the local paper saying many years ago there was so somebody's made it up.
Right.
It seems. But the fantastic thing about it is I was able to go on these message boards and say, has anybody ever heard about this? And those people saying, no, I've never have. And then somebody gets in touch with me and says, hang on. And he tells me this story about, basically he used to go and, he lived near Formby. He'd go and sit off with his mates. They'd build a little bonfire, have a few cans and whatever. And he went off for a pee once over the sand dunes. And he said, and then I heard this noise that sounded like there's a train coming at me. Literally like something is going to come over the hill and it's going to be a juggernaut or something that's going to smash into me. And he said, the biggest dog I have ever seen, this big black dog, comes running over, hears past me, and he basically jumped out the way, went and said to his mates, and they all said, you're that bladdered, you've just, shit yourself because the dogs ran past you. But he had no idea of what I was looking for or what I'd read, and he's gone, but it's all tied in then. Now, I'm working on the premise that the original thing is bollocks anyway.
Yeah.
And yet I've kind of got some sort of...
All confirmation?
Confirmation of it. And that's, I love that. I love that it works that way round as well as the other way round.
Yeah,
It's like you can accidentally create a black dog legend and then it be true.
Yeah. Will it into existence.
Yeah.
Do you ever remember that Dave Allen story about going to the little village in Ireland? I don't know if you remember that.
No.
He says there's a guy on holiday in Ireland, and he goes to this village, and he says the whole village is empty. It's empty. So he walks around, the pub's empty, the shops are empty, and he notices on the hill, he can see that there's sort of a line of people. So he's like, God, that's odd. So he's like, right, okay. He goes up to the hill and gets to the top of this hill. And at the top of this hill, he finds one long line of men, all in black. No women, just men. And he walks to the front of this big long line of men, and he gets right to the front. And at the front of this big cortege of men, there's a coffin there with pallbearers, and there's a stone-faced man. And he's got a lead there with the biggest, blackest dog you ever saw on it. And he says to him, he says, excuse me, he says, I'm in the village. What the hell's happening? He said, it's the funeral of my wife, sir, today. She was very well loved. And he's like, oh, right, okay. He said, and what was the dog? Was the dog very special to her? Did she love the dog? He's right at the front of the cortege. That dog savaged her, sir. That dog killed her. Worried her to death. And he says, I don't suppose you'd fancy selling that dog, would you? Get to the back of the queue. You just reminded me with being on about the
Black
dogs.
Yeah.
But so what was the most convincing ghost story in there? You could sell a few books here.
Oh God! Now you see, it's a long time ago I wrote it. To be honest, do you know what? That was one I really liked because of how neatly it fitted. And how it's completely the wrong way round. Most of the ones that you are told on your ghost tour of Liverpool don't work out if you look into them. And that was this is the thing that Richard did, which is
I'm terrible for ruining.
You've ruined so many ghost stories.
Why is that?
Because I bother to do the research and find out they can't be.
Oh, the shite.
Yeah. Well, no, because the stories and they have an important role. They
well,
say
it's
something.
generally the meaning behind the story. It's either to give life advice or to tell a kid to stay away from somewhere, isn't it?
The obvious one is Ginny Greenteeth.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know if you know this, but it's just something Jenny Greenteeth, she's sometimes called.
Oh, Jimmy.
Jimmy. A water witch that apparently drags kids into water, and it's quite popular all across Lancashire.
Yeah. It's duckweed, isn't it?
It's
duckweed.
It's the green. And I've seen it on a pond. I've been walking through a park or a field. And,
because a kid can think it's grass.
Yeah, just walk straight over,
into it, so be aware of Ginny Greenteeth. That's an obvious one. But you're right, there are sometimes morals and stuff, but one I think John was just about to mention was Mackenzie.
Mackenzie's tomb.
Mackenzie's tomb.
Everyone's favourite.
I was going to bring that up. The pyramid.
Bloody loves it, and I bloody love it. And the reason
there's one in Edinburgh as well, isn't there?
There's a few of them.
Yeah. And the reason I got into this was because
But Mackenzie's tomb, if you don't know what we're on about, is the pyramidal tomb next to the Methodist chapel, is that right?
Scottish Presbyterian chapel.
Scottish Presbyterian.
On Rodney Street in Liverpool city centre. And as a kid, and the church suffered a massive fire in 1974 or 76. So for my entire childhood, it was a ruin. And it was just this dark, austere, soot-stained church, black as anything. And then in the graveyard, all overgrown and weed-strewn next to it, is this massive black pyramid with a green, must have been copper or something, shape above this doorway. And it's sort of, as a kid, I could have swore to you that was glowing green.
Yeah.
It's
the most fantastically kind of occult.
It's got the Masonic symbol on it.
It has?
It has, yes.
And the Masons are over the road.
Well, the Scottish Presbyterian was surely tying with the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry somehow.
Must do. And but the story that was put about was that this tomb belonged to a man called William Mackenzie, who was a wealthy man, but also a bit of a gambler and an atheist. And the story goes that in his life he won and lost fortunes at the card table every night, and he didn't believe in God or anything. Made fortunes, lost fortunes, and then one night he was on a particularly bad run of luck. He's down on his last few, and his head was in his hands in despair. And he gets approached by this strange, mysterious gentleman who says, "Mr. Mackenzie, why'd you look so down?" He says, "Oh, you stupid man, I've lost everything. I was a wealthy man once, and I've lost it all on this stupid game of cards. I'd give anything to get it back, anything." The man says, "Would you give me your soul?" Turns out it's the devil himself in disguise.
The old fella.
The old fella.
The old fella himself.
The old Nick. And he turns up and he says, "Okay, Mr. Mackenzie, what if you promise me your soul, when you're lying in the ground, if I can have your soul, then I will make sure you win any game of cards you play in the future. You'll win your fortune back. You'll be a wealthy man once again." Mackenzie says, "Well, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in a soul. What have I got to lose?" And he signs the contract, doesn't he? Next game he plays, he wins, and within a few nights he's made his fortune back. time goes on and Mackenzie's reaching his dotage, and he realises that in his mind he's a businessman. He's still got in his head the contract he signed, and he works out that he signed a contract that said that the devil could only claim his soul when he was lying in the ground. Therefore, if he decides that he wouldn't be buried in the ground conventionally, but rather above it, the devil would therefore have no claim upon his soul. So he writes it into his will that he's to be buried in this pyramid tomb, sitting in an armchair, holding a winning hand of cards.
I knew the sitting in a chair winning with the winning hand of cards. I did not know the reasoning behind it.
Wow.
That's smashing.
The thing is, he thought he was clever, didn't he? Because he thought he'd cheat the devil of his soul. And he did. The devil can't claim his soul, but because he's made a pact with the devil, he's not allowed into heaven either.
Right.
Therefore, his soul is eternally trapped upon this earth to wander forever.
Oh, the old wander for eternity.
Sometimes on dark nights down Rodney Street.
I've seen him.
You've seen him.
I bumped into him. Especially after viewing The Fly in the Loaf. What a lovely story.
It's a great story. And it's a story I deeply love, and I deeply love the story. And I'm just almost sorry that it's not true.
Yeah,
it might be true.
Just don't ruin it now.
Yeah.
Don't ruin it for
all
everyone.
the children listening out there. It's true.
Know, it's true.
Don't have nightmares.
Yeah, it's true.
My granddad used to go on about they were playing cards in the Ship Inn in Blackbrook in Haydock, and one guy dropped a card and went to pick it up, and the enigmatic stranger that was playing with them, the one-handed enigmatic stranger apparently, he went to pick it up. And he noticed the cloven hoof and the forked tail, which is probably a corruption of the same thing. With one hand, I don't know how he shuffled, but at any rate, he was invited into the game. I'm sure it can be done. Yeah. No, I love that. I love that tomb, and I didn't know all that legend.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, it's one of the most. It's really strange how it's tucked away now as well. That graveyard, because I presume that part of Rodney Street was
accommodation now.
Oh, is it?
The churches, yeah.
Oh, the actual Scottish Presbyterian thing.
Yeah, so, they must have to leave the actual churchyard alone.
Yeah, well, the Freemason thing is another thing that's sort of shrouded in mystery and this, that, and the other, isn't it? I don't know a great deal about it apart from it's something to do with King Solomon, isn't it, and his temple, and it's something to do with the Crusades and the guys bringing something back with them. Probably syphilis. I've no idea.
I know that there's
syphilis and forks.
Syphilis and forks. Yeah. Yeah.
They try to demystify it a lot now, don't they? And they try to kind of get more people involved because I think it's on the wane, isn't it?
Well, like everything, it's people just can't be arsed going anywhere anymore. That's the basic truth of nowadays.
We don't need to now. We've got phones. We can talk to each other instantly.
And that digital interface that breaks up our organic connection. Yes.
Our bloody secret societies are all suffering because of
that's right. Yeah. They're all knackered now.
WhatsApp group, haven't they? Masons UK WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Group.
Well, sure. They just all sit off, just chatting to each other instead of getting off their
doing
asses.
a right tonight.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, isn't it? It's a funny thing. I don't pretend I know anything about it, but that's another fertile ground for conspiracy theories, isn't it? Freemasons and stuff like that.
I'm thinking you saying about the stories, and I don't know about the most plausible, but I remember the one that I was most pleased with, which I got a few off people which I actually didn't use because it was basically like they'd written a very good story, and I was like, I appreciate this, I appreciate that you've given me this, but it's almost like you've just gone, I've got a good ghost story that I could tell you.
Right.
The one that I let get in there, because it had such a good punchline, was basically, there was a brilliant one where a woman had said her and her family, they lived in this house, it was up in Newsham Parkway, and she lived there, she had 2 young kids, and she had a grandmother who was living with them, and they all used to see different things in the house, there was different things going on, and basically they kept seeing kids, they would see these ghost kids, but they would see a woman who would always be chastising the kids, and then it always used to freak her out. It freaked her mum out, who was the grandma. It freaked out her elder kid, I think. But it was something that wasn't talked about. And then years later, she said to her kids, do you remember when we used to live in that house? Do you remember all that stuff going on? And the eldest kid sort of said, I vaguely remember that. I can't really remember why. And the younger kid, who was the daughter, was really freaked out. And she said to her, like, don't you want to talk about it? When you never said anything about it. And she said, well, we were told not to talk about it, weren't we? And she said,
Whoa.
who told you not to talk about it? And she said, well, the woman. The woman, the old
Jesus.
woman told us not to talk about it. And she said, well, why did she say not to talk about it? And she said, because we'd have to play with the kids then, wouldn't we?
Whoa.
It's brilliant, you know.
That's making the hair on my arm stand up, that. That's terrifying. No, yeah. So where can we get this book then? You say you can get it, can you not get it online?
It's the History Press, so you'll be able to get it. I mean, you can get it on Amazon or anywhere. Yeah,
800 years of
800 years of Haunted Liverpool, except no other Haunted Liverpool books.
I shan't. 800 years, so that would take you back to what?
1207.
When
it was published.
Yeah.
So what was the oldest story then?
Do you know what?
That's a good question.
That is a good question. What was I going back to? Probably the stuff to do with the collapse of the tower that used to be behind. No, see, this is
St.
where.
Nick's Gardens.
Yes, St. Nick's Gardens. There was a big
Liverpool Tower.
Liverpool Tower.
Well, there was a church tower. It was church spire. Collapsed, didn't it?
and that had that was very old. That had existed for kind of.
It was a medieval one.
It was a medieval one, yeah. And I think there was a fire, was there?
Then black shucks, like all the black dogs, go back to Viking age, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, I had all sort of Liverpool Viking history
So
stuff
this
in there as
tower,
well.
what, collapsed in 1207?
No, it was built in 1207. It stood for hundreds of years. It was sort of built at the same time as the castle.
Yeah.
Right.
But it was one of the oldest things in Liverpool. And then there was tunnels under it, is that right? I can't remember, but it collapsed spectacularly, basically, because it shouldn't have been left up.
Right.
But people died in the collapse because they were still using it. Was it prisoners? Were they keeping prisoners in it?
I think it was.
Like overspill from the jail seat. This is too long ago for me to remember.
It was
It was 800 years ago.
It was 800 years ago I wrote this book. But yeah, that was probably my oldest one. I can't remember when it collapsed. It had collapsed, 1600s or something like that. But it definitely took some people out with it. And then there was a pub round the back of the Oyster, which is the
Marboyle's Oyster Bar.
Marboyle's Oyster Bar, and that was being haunted about the time that I was writing the book. There was definitely a picture of Billy Butler that had a ghost in it. The Radio Merseyside had posted.
Billy Butler with a ghost.
Yeah, Billy Butler with a ghost, and that was and they were saying, is this something to do with these old subterranean tunnels? And yeah, that had tied into this tower collapse somehow. I didn't speak to Billy Butler though.
No. A few of us do.
He's too up there, isn't he?
Well, he's one of the gods. He is one of the gods.
Yeah.
Well, chaps, it's been a fascinating chat.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
And I think we probably need to go to the pub and drink more beer now.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So is there any website or anything we can find out more about the Liverpool tour guides and stuff?
Yeah, well, my website's richardmacdonald.co.uk.
That's MAC.
MAC.
MacDonald.
MacDonald. And
my website is mine and my wife's names together, which is very difficult to remember, which is morereppion.com. So that's MOOREREPPION.com.
Right, and I'll put it in the description.
Please do.
Cheers, chaps, and
Thank you very much, Mike.
let's hope the bed bugs don't bite tonight.
Chin,
Chin chin. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.